Hello and welcome to the Embrace Your Destiny podcast. My name is Sandra Dawes and I'm your host. And if you're new to the podcast, the Embrace Your Destiny podcast is all about sharing the journeys of women who have been through a challenging time in their life, and they share how they got through it, the lessons they've learned, and offer advice to anyone who may be going through something similar in their own life. And today my guest is Lynne Hurdle. And Lynne is a communication expert and conflict resolution strategist, facilitator, speaker, and leadership coach with over 35 years experience in blending the connection between communication, conflict, and culture into her unique style of engagement for leaders. She is the author of the bestseller, Closing Conflict for Leaders, How to Be a Bold Leader and Develop a Kick-Ass, High-Functioning, Happy AF Team. Prevention, intervention, and transformational conflict resolution are all at the heart of her work. Lynne's expertise is in engaging her clients with creative processes designed to create dialogue and teach skills that can be used in the most difficult leadership situations. The belief that helping people transform their lives begins with transforming your own led to her well-received TEDxWomen talk entitled The Weight of Hate. Lynne created the Soul of Conflict Summit, a groundbreaking online forum designed to create a deep dialogue around conflict, old wounds, and healing. She passionately writes about breaking culture, conflict, and cultural breakthroughs for psychology today. And she has had the privilege to deliver her unique trainings, workshops, and deep coaching to leaders from Harlem to Hong Kong and from the South Bronx to South Africa. Lynne brings a wealth of knowledge, experience, and her special Lynnergy to every client. Lynne, thanks so much for being a guest today.
Oh, thank you for doing this important podcast. Thank you so much for having me.
So, Lynne, why don't we dive in and get started on sharing your journey?
Okay, so I have a couple of moments of my journey, but my journey into conflict resolution work really started when I was 17. And up until, I guess, from 3 to 17, I knew my path, which was to be an actress and an entertainer, and in my eyes, absolutely a star. And everything I did, I did toward that point, including that at 17, I was a senior in High School of Music and Art, which is a performing arts high school in New York City. And so I was set. I was on my way to Syracuse University the following year to be a theater major. And so I'm on this bus, and I live in the Bronx at that time. I still actually live in the Bronx now. And at that time, on the bus is myself, another teenager, and the bus driver. We are the only African Americans on the bus. The bus is full and everyone else is white. And we stop at about a mile from my home, and the bus driver is not opening the door. So I look through the windows, and I see about 50 white males with red bandanas running toward the bus. And I'm noticing a lot of them have baseball bats. And they surround the bus, and they're screaming the N-word and screaming for us to come off the bus. And the bus driver refused to open the door, and they begin to try to tip the bus over. And the only thing that stopped them is that across the street comes another bus filled with African American kids. And so they run over there, and I jump off the bus with the other teenager who I didn't know at the time, but he went to my school, and he's terrified because he just moved into the neighborhood. He was literally only there a week and had no idea how to get home. I took him home, and as soon as I left him, I can remember the thought coming in my mind and fully in my spirit too. I have to do something about this. I have to be able to bring people together around these issues. And I do not know where that came from, because as I said, I was going to be a star.
Right. You had your path lined up, and yeah.
From 3 years old. So truly, I had no idea what I was going to do with that, but I was really certain of it. And as it would happen, that next year, I went to Syracuse, and the following year, they started this new program called Nonviolent Conflict and Change. And I switched from theater into that program. And that started me on the path of learning about conflict resolution and mediation. And I have not looked back. It's been over 35 years, and I've made my life and career in this work.
I did conflict resolution, dispute resolution in high school as well. There was a program in our high school because there were lots of fights happening. Not so much race related, but just, regular teenage angst sort of things going on. And There was a pilot project with the school board at the time. And I remember thinking it was kind of cool to be chosen to be on this, but I didn't understand the value of it until after I graduated from my undergraduate degree, and I saw a certificate in dispute resolution, and I am a lifelong student. So I was like, oh, let's do this and let's see where that takes us. But I feel like everybody should have dispute resolution under their belt, whether they want to be a mediator or not, because it helps so much in your interactions with your family, with people on the street, in your job. Like, it's one of the most valuable tools to have under your belt, I think.
I think so too, because conflict is everywhere and it's in every part of our lives. And people really don't understand that, which, brings me actually to the second piece of my story, which was the major crisis, heartbreak in my life that really made me shift in a huge way. And that is that my mom died actually a year before I became a mom myself. And she died from breast cancer. And it was up until that point. I mean, I had lost my grandmother, who I loved dearly. And so that was a pain. But the pain of losing my mom, like, I had no idea how significant that pain would be. And particularly right before I became a mother myself. So that really took me through quite a lot, through depression, and certainly through just wondering why it would be such a cruel thing. Why such a cruel thing would happen that before I became a mom, or right before that she would pass. And so it took me a really long time to push through that. Thank God for our son, because he really, he were those moments of sunshine for me. But what it also did was it helped me to answer a very nagging question in my business. And the question was, why aren't people using these conflict resolution skills in their everyday life? Because I do trainings and people would love the trainings, and we do all this work in trainings, and then they'd come back. The school or the company would send them back. They're not using them, and you talked about being a peer mediator. It might be a mediator.
Right.
You're not using them. And even the people that we're working with, like, people aren't using these skills. Like, what is it? What is it? And so what I did was I looked at what was the downside of my mom dying, and then what, my goodness, could I possibly look at what might be the opportunity presented here, which I think really shocked a lot of people, because there could not be a good side, right? I mean, that would be against everything, against culture, against religion, everything. Like, there's a good side, and the good side and the opportunity was that I had the chance to find out how I wanted to mother, and to do it my way, without having to go by what she would have wanted me to do, or told me to do, or insisted that I do, or whatever that was going to be. And so as a result, I started to work on me and conflict. And me, and how I looked at things like discipline and punishment, and even having conversation or culture. Or what does that mean? And it started to lead me to a place of looking at how we even begin to have conflict and how we begin to do conflict and what is it that leads us to even thinking the way we do about conflict. So that just completely transformed my life. And so then I started to transform my work. And that's when I was able to take people through the journey of conflict in their lives and how it's constructed for them at a very young age and what are your triggers and what is your mindset, then I'm able to get to the place where we can start to look at why we don't pull out the skills. What gets in the way of us pulling out the skills? And it all has to do with how conflict was even constructed for us and how we don't override our triggers. We just let them lead us into reacting in ways that aren't the best.
Right, because there's a certain lack of self-awareness. Right?
There's a huge lack of self-awareness. It's all automatic pilot, right?
Yeah, those knee-jerk reactions.
Yes,
yeah.
And it's all, and the other side is, the rules. I was reading something today because I go by the handle of the conflict closer. And so a lot of people know me online and when something comes up, they'll go, Lynne, what's your thought on this? And someone tagged me today about a conflict where the sports announcer was saying that, hey, my grandfather told me somebody does this, you beat them down, and that's what you're supposed to do, and all these things. So the culture will also jump in there and say, well, if you're a true whatever, African American, a true man, a true whatever, right?
Yeah.
This is what you're supposed to do, right? And we never question that. We just, because we usually learn it as kids. They usually instill it in us young. And so we just go along and then we notice everybody else is doing the same thing too. So okay. So if somebody if somebody hits me, I have to hit them back. Not just hit them back. I have to knock them out so they don't get up again.
I have, it reminds me of this funny story that I heard years ago. And it's an example that I use about perspective and tradition and cultures and this sort of thing. And it was the story about this woman who always, whenever she did a roast, would cut the ends off the roast before she put it in the pan. And so she saw her mother do it, so that's how she made her roast, but she never asked why her mother cut the two ends off. She just thought that's what you do. And so one day when she was preparing the roast, she did what she normally does and cut the two ends off, and somebody was in the kitchen with her and asked her why she did it. And she had no answer. She's like, I don't know. I saw my mom do it, so that's what I do. But I never asked my mom why. So this person asking her why triggered her to ask her mom why. And the answer was so simple. It was because that was the only way the roast was going to fit in the pan. But, you see somebody doing something for so long that you assume that there's some scientific or, there is method behind the madness. And sometimes it's just a really simple explanation. So if it fit in the pan without you cutting the ends off, there was no need to cut the ends off.
Right. That's right. Exactly. And there's so much of that, particularly I find in conflict. Everybody has their own little rules, but where did they get them from? And are they even authentic to you? Or are you just going along and think that it's okay? And of course, you're going to get cheered for it. That's right. That's what you do.
Yeah.
And what I'm asking people to do is to really to push back on that. I've coined the phrase breaking culture. For me, it's really about, it's not that you're giving up your culture or even speaking against it, but you are questioning why this way? Why? And how does that fit for me? Because even the why, even after you explain it to me, is that authentic to me? Is that how I want to do things? Do I want to spank my kids? Do I believe that kids should be seen and not heard? Do I, all of these
Yeah.
things that come up that are really tied into culture that for me, I no longer had such a hard time with it, because don't get me wrong, there were certainly other people who did not understand or approve of the way my sons were raised, but
Right.
they weren't my mother. They may have been family, but they weren't my mother. So they didn't
Right.
carry as much weight. So, you know, so it was a little easier to push back against them, but it was still difficult. But that was why I had to know. Like, I had to know why this trigger doesn't work for me. I had to know why I no longer bought into that particular cultural norm. And that really is a journey. And it's the journey that I take my clients through so that they can look at it for themselves and decide what's going to work and what's not going to work, and what they'd like to replace and with some different skill sets.
Right. Lynne, what would you say is the biggest lesson that you've learned in your journey so far?
Ooh, wow, that's a really good question. Oh, I think the biggest lesson that I learned is that I really can override a trigger. That I really can stop myself simply through awareness that I am being triggered. That it's leading me to some place that I do not want to be led to, and there's got to be another way. There's got to be a different way, and a way that doesn't involve my crushing someone else, and in particular my sons, or any kids or young people. I don't like to crush people in general, but kids in particular, young people in particular, can be crushed so easily, and I would rather hold myself back and figure it out than just unleash whatever is trying to come out.
Right, because it's
me.
not always, or in most cases, not the most productive way to handle it.
It's not productive. It's one of those things that you just explode. And then once you're able to come down, even if you don't know how to do it differently, what you feel is that you wish
that regret is not nice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, it's not. It's not a good feeling. And nor is it one that I want to continue to have to live with over and over again. I have that responsibility, as far as I'm concerned, to use different methods, to use some skills, to use some tools, even if it's very difficult in the moment.
Right. It reminds me of that quote, when you know better, you do better, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's an overrated quote. I hear Oprah use it a lot, and I'm like, no, that's actually not true. That people know better, but they still don't do better. When you do better, you do better. I feel like that's it.
For me, it's that when you know better, you have an obligation to do better, but you don't always step up to the plate to
always do it. Right.
Be your highest self, or whatever you want to call it. But that's the challenge, right? Is that's when you know better, it just makes things a little bit more difficult, because now you're not reacting, unconsciously. Now you know what you're doing, but sometimes it's like
now you know what you're doing, and you're choosing to still do the other, because the other is much easier, more instinctual, and the other is tied to emotions, and emotions take us on a ride, man.
I mean, a lot of these things are habits, right? You don't even think about it anymore. You're just doing it. So you have to reprogram yourself. And some of us don't have the willingness or the energy to do that.
Right. And some of us also play the power card because it's easier.
Right.
Yeah. I see that in leaders. I see that in business all the time. It's much easier for me to just play the power card than to listen longer, and to try to understand what my coworker or my team is saying, to me. Just go do
Right.
it
Don't
because I
question
said
me.
so. It's
Yeah.
so much easier as a leader, as a parent, I mean, whatever it
Yeah.
is. Yeah.
That is the challenge though, right? To
Mm-hmm,
really be
mm-hmm.
open to the opportunities, because you know that if you can communicate better and manage conflict in a healthier way, that everybody's going to be happier and you're going to be more productive.
Yes. And you're going to have better
Absolutely. Yeah.
relationships everywhere. And, contrary to popular belief, relationships are everything as far as I'm concerned. They are everything, starting with the relationship you have with yourself. So when you say you're going to be happier, yeah, the relationship I have with myself is I like the way I handle conflict these days, right? So
Right.
starting right there, I'm happier. And then you have relationships, more and more businesses are noticing or taking into account that it's the businesses that help their employees develop better relationships that are thriving more because people want to be productive for the company because they have buy-in. I
Right.
like the people I work with. I come to work and I'm looking forward to this, and we work together and we do it well, and so of course the company's going to thrive. But if you hate the people you work with, if you really at odds with your family, so you don't enjoy anything. You don't enjoy the holidays
Right.
because it's family time. You don't enjoy work because you got to come in and see these people that you hate. You don't enjoy your neighbors.
Yeah, and the commute's probably not going very well either.
Right, exactly. So yeah, I mean, you gotta. It's the thing that people run from, but it's honestly the one of the most important things that I think people have to do is we have to get better at conflict, and I'm determined to help people have a better relationship with
Yeah, I think that's
conflict.
important because I know for me, when I started to do the work on dispute resolution, conflict management, it was understanding that conflict isn't a bad thing. Because I think that that was part of my, you know what I mean? Conflict is something that you avoid. You
Yeah.
don't dive into it. You don't,
Oh my gosh.
run
Yeah.
for the
Right.
hills. There's
It's
conflict
bad.
happening. So it's understanding that conflict
Right.
is, it's natural, that it's a part of life, and that
Hmm.
when you can deal
Hmm.
with it, that life will be so much better for it, right? Instead of pretending that it doesn't exist and, having the same arguments over and over again, or those kinds of things, that you're actually dealing with it in a meaningful way, getting to the root cause of the conflict, and then figuring out a way to move forward in a way that works for everybody.
Yeah, and it's and that knowing that and doing that right away makes a huge difference because people by avoiding have they make it build up and it gets to be something that it really doesn't need to be. A perfect example, this weekend I was with someone and I offer retainer services. So it's often by phone or text or whatever, but this time my client and I happened to be in the same place. And in person. And she presented me with a conflict that she was dealing with. And I said, oh my gosh, it was really a simple thing that had you addressed it right at the start, right? Someone was sitting where they weren't supposed to be sitting, and this was her space to be sitting in. And and she didn't say it. And so then it carried on to other people then
Right.
started sitting there. And then, it snowballed. And I said, but you have the skills to have stopped it right at the start. And that's a simple conversation. And because we are so conditioned to fear and avoid conflict, we don't have this simple conversation. And then it just builds, and I find that that's what really people hate the most
Yes.
is the buildup. It's like, oh my gosh, this thing got so
Right, and then
big from what?
when you get down to what caused it in the first place, you're like, really, how did it get this serious? Because it never started off that serious, but I left it alone thinking it would just go away, and now it's this
Yes.
massive thing. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Whether it's young people, schools that would, oh, this person looked at me wrong, and it escalated into this whole war. I mean, I've seen young people go to war literally with each other. And when you peel away the layers, you get them in mediation, you peel away the layers, started because someone looked at someone else the way they didn't like.
I just had something happen this weekend, and it was funny because, well, not funny for everybody else involved, but just funny from an observation standpoint. I was at a store, and somebody was in the line, and they decided that they wanted to get out the line, and she said, "Excuse me." And the woman who she was saying "excuse me" to didn't hear her and replied with a "pardon me." And the person who said "excuse me" took it to mean that she was saying, implying that she could have said "excuse me" instead of pushing forward, which as the observer, I knew that that wasn't what happening. But this person who said "excuse me" just blew up. And to me, because I know better, right? I was just like, oh, she was having a bad day before this exchange happened. Do you know what I mean? And so she just flew off the handle and was ready to like fight this woman, not physically fight her, but was ready to like get into this heated conversation about the fact that she thought that this woman thought she had no manners. And it was just amazing to see how it all just... Like you saw the smoke starting to build up. It was like, oh, ladies, it's not, no. And, but yeah, it's just interesting to see how, you know, how you come into a situation can impact things in such a severe way and you're not even conscious of it. You know what I mean? I think that for me, there are times where I'm like, you know what, I need to stay home today because I don't want to deal with anybody. And I feel like that was what was going on with that woman, is that something happened that set her off that day. And no matter who got in her way, whether it was by accident or on purpose, they were going to get it. And, you know, understanding that is so big.
It is huge. And it makes a huge difference. And being able to say things, you know, being patient is the other thing. I find that when people really do work on conflict resolution, that they start to work on having to have patience. We have so little patience with one another. It's unbelievable to me how, as you said, it can go from 0 to 100 in a matter of seconds, rather than people having the patience to try to check in and see what's actually going on and try to understand one another.
Yeah, I think patience is almost a lost art form these days.
Yeah, I think people just really start to dig in on people, or they completely avoid and don't bother to check out what is happening. Right? And people want their minds to be read. Like, people don't read your minds. That is still
they're not teaching that in high schools or university yet.
Right. With all the technological advances, mind reading is still not a skill that we have. So we have to talk to each other in order to find out what's being meant by what people are saying or doing.
Yeah.
And instead, not only do we read minds, we make these assumptions about why they're doing what they're doing. And it's always negative.
So we're upset that people can't read our minds, but then we think that we can read their minds to know what their motivations and intentions are. Yeah.
That's right. They just don't respect me. And that's why they're doing it.
Right.
They don't know. You know, chances are they don't know. So you have to tell them, and you can tell them in a way that, you know, and then it's the other thing. I don't want to hurt people's feelings. It's not about hurting people's feelings. Like, how are you going to say it? Like, really? How are you planning to say it? Because there's a way to say it. And hey, you're not responsible for someone else taking it that way if you say it in the best way that you possibly can. But if that's how they take it, then that may extend and prolong the conversation, but you're capable. I think we don't understand how much more we are capable of.
Right.
We are not going to fall apart. We actually can have the difficult conversation and come out on the other side okay.
That's right. Yeah, survive it.
Yeah. So for me, I love the work because I really do help a lot of people take that journey. And a lot of times, like I said, they don't want to take it. but they recognize the importance of doing it. And so by working with me, I help them to celebrate the times where they actually just take it on and they jump right in. They're not avoiding it and they actually use the skills. And sometimes they use them badly, but that's a lesson learned. And sometimes it's right on and it goes well. But it's all my experience is that however you think it's going to go, when you actually engage, it never goes that place. It never goes that badly. Or hardly ever goes as badly as it did it in your mind.
Yeah, we're pretty good at creating those worst case scenarios.
Yes. And I mean, I said to one of my clients, I don't understand how we're not all screenwriters, because the stories we put together in our heads.
Oscar-worthy.
Yes, they are very Oscar-worthy, yes.
Lynne, what advice would you give to somebody out there, somebody listening who is struggling with managing conflict in their own life?
Yeah. Well, I would say that the first thing that you want to do is to recognize that it starts with you. Because the most common thing that I am met with whenever conflict happens and someone comes to me about a conflict is that they want me to fix the other person.
Right.
That is, that's just what people come for. If they come for a workshop, even if they're mandated for a workshop, whatever it is, or they just want to talk to me about conflict in their life, whatever it is, they want to talk about what's wrong with
the other person is the problem. It's not my fault. I didn't do anything, Lynne. I swear.
I didn't do anything. That's right. And so I want you to recognize that it starts with you, just like it starts with me. Hey, that's the first place. So begin to think about how you even think about conflict and what is it that you often do when you are met with conflict, and start to look at, if you're an avoider, start to look at why and what is difficult for you about conflict. And then the second thing for me is learn to listen more and deeper. We just spend very little time listening. Most of us listen up to the point at which we wish to interrupt the other person. And that's pretty quickly in the conversation. Yeah. That comes pretty quickly. And what I want to say is listen beyond that place where you want to interrupt. Listen to fully understand. Number one, it's great to know what you're having a conflict about. That's number one, like really what you're having a conflict about. And number two, it's great then to be able to address what the conflict is about. We spend a lot of time talking about what the conflict is not really about because we've not listened long enough and understood each other well enough. And so we've jumped in at that place where we want to say we're right and they're wrong. And now we have extended this conversation. Whereas if I just listened through and really checked in with you to find out, is this what I heard? And is this what the conflict is about for you? Then at least when I start to talk, I can talk to the points that you're talking about. Like, this is what the conflict is about. So I would say that those two things, recognize that it's you, starts with you. Look at what it is that you even do in conflict and feel about conflict is the beginning place, and recognize where that works and doesn't work. And then listen more to the other person so that you can understand what the conflict is really about. And so when you start to address it, you are actually addressing those points.
I think that's great advice because it's not like anybody can survive life without dealing with conflict. It's a part of the experience. So if we can manage conflict in a more productive, positive way, then why not take those opportunities to do that?
Right. Exactly. And nothing has ever created major change but conflict.
Yeah.
Nothing else. Yeah. Major change has been created by conflict, and recognizing that conflict in its simplest form is just two opposing ideas that either create some kind of struggle or some kind of impasse.
Yeah.
right? That's, and I mean, so at its simplest form, that's what it is. And we're allowed, I mean, why wouldn't there be two
At
opposing
least two,
ideas?
yeah.
At least two. We're at least two.
Yeah.
We're all different. So why wouldn't there be two opposing ideas at some point in your day?
Right. And I think that a conflict provides a great opportunity for something else even better than what was there before. So, yeah.
Yes. 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 And if we get on board and try to work together to resolve it, then we can do that and we can have these conversations. I've sat through many conversations. My youngest is 17, and I've sat through many conversations that were hard to hear and difficult and hurt my heart in some way. And I survived. And not only did I survive, but I learned a lot. I learned about what he was thinking and feeling. I learned what were the things that I did that didn't particularly sit well. It doesn't mean that I'm any less good a mother. It doesn't mean that I have any less authority by listening to him. It just doesn't, and we tend to think that as leaders, as parents, like, oh, if I allow them to say these things to me, that takes away my power. No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
You still have power. You still have that card you can pull. But at the same time, you've had an opportunity to really hear what's in their hearts. Because I'll tell you, with parents, one of the things that I hear all the time, my child doesn't talk to me. Well, when they did,
what
when they tried, when they do, what did you do, right? What did you do other than say, I want you to talk to me? Right? Because my mom used to say that all the time. And then she followed that by yelling and screaming. Hey, I don't have to talk to you. I really don't have to. As much as you think I do because you're the parent, I don't have to. When anybody shares anything with me, I consider that a gift.
Absolutely.
Because we are not entitled to other people's thoughts.
Lynne, thank you so much for your insights and wisdom today. I enjoyed our conversation. I'm sure the listeners will get a lot out of it and probably come back and listen to it again. And for those of you listening, you can check back in the show notes and find out more about Lynne, what she does, and where to find her on social media. And Lynne, again, thank you so much. And to the listeners, have an awesome day, and I'll see you next week.